Hello and welcome to The Current Thing with me, Nick Dixon, where we talk about the culture war, politics and anything else that comes up. And we have another great guest. He's an excellent comedian and an all-round good guy, and you can tell because he's been cancelled not once but twice by the comedy industry, which is a real badge of honour. And of course I'm talking about Mr. Andrew Lawrence. Thanks for doing the show, Andrew.
Oh, thanks for having me on. Thanks for having me on. It's nice to catch up. I think the last time, maybe the last time we spoke was after the kind of second time I'd caused an outrage and everything was going crazy, and you gave me a call, and we talked on the phone for about an hour about it, and which was nice of you. Yeah, it's that's, you find out who your friends are when, of course, when you go through that sort of experience. So that was nice of you to make that call, and it's nice to see it's nice to see you progressing and how well you're doing at GB News and your podcasting, because you're so good at stand-up that, that to hit a brick wall with that because of the politics of the industry, and to have to, or to make the choice to go in a different direction is a brave one, and I commend you for that. I mean, how do you miss doing stand-up at all?
Do you know what I was going to ask? I was going to ask you if you could ever not do stand-up later on, but this is a good question. I mean, firstly, I forgot I called you. That's nice. That makes me look nice. But it reminds me of that Louis C. I know we talked at that party about it, but I've forgotten I called you. It reminds me of that Louis C.K. joke. Like, you find out who your real friends are. And he's like, it's never who you want. He's like, it's not my cool friends, it's my real friends. And it's always Nick Dixon. It's like, it's Nick. I've got the call from Nick. I'm in trouble.
Could have been a lot worse. Could have done worse.
Yeah, Prince Andrew's calling up. I thought of that because I was just watching a thing about the coronation, but we'll get on to all that. Did you ask if I miss stand-up?
Yeah.
Good question. You've turned the tables on me already, first question. But I actually don't miss it. When the lockdown hit, we were forced to not do it, obviously. And I was like, I was doing a joke at the time when we came back. I was like, I had a feeling after a few months. I was like, what is this? Like, it's happiness. I feel way better because I don't have to go and speak to weirdos in the dark and get judged. Yeah. But of course, I miss the kind of, one thing I do miss is the sort of buzz of it when it's going well, because you can't really recreate that on TV. TV shows are more like, there's a problem with the auto cue. Oh, it's a difficult show. We've got to learn all these stories. Oh, it's over and I feel nothing. Whereas stand-up is that buzz, isn't it? And which you can't really get anywhere else. But on the whole, I don't miss it because I obviously hate the industry. It's got so weird with me, Andrew. Someone sent me a text the other day, can you go over my set and just give me pointers or whatever? And I couldn't even look at the message with the picture of the comedy club. I deleted it so I didn't have to look at it. I'm like, I've got some sort of post-traumatic stress disorder. The only one I can watch is Comedy Unleashed. And I watched your whole Comedy Unleashed. I was just watching it again now. I've forgotten something because I watched it when it came out a few weeks ago. But that was really good. I mean, you're back. You've had a break from cancellation break, and now you're back. What was that like?
Well, the conventional wisdom with stand-up is that you have to be gigging 3-4 nights a week to stay sharp and to be at your best. I think in the current climate, I think for most stand-ups, actually, for most comedians, that's a privilege they don't have because the UK circuit is in a fairly parlous state. It's the club circuit seems to be, from what I gather, seems to be sort of collapsing, and a lot of acts trying to tour, but I think venues are at a premium because there still exists this COVID backlog where so many people weren't able to get out in front of a live audience during the pandemic that suddenly, when restrictions were lifted, everyone wanted to be out and doing a tour at the same time. And I think it's tough for acts to get touring venues, even if they can sell tickets to a degree. I mean, if you can sell 1,000 seats, then you'll find the venues, but there's a sort of there's a market for where acts can sell 200, 300 seats, where there's a lot of demand for those size of theatres. So even if even if you're not, even if you haven't fallen on the wrong side of the industry's politics, I think it's very difficult for comics at the moment. So back to that point, that getting that stage time, or the idea that you need to be gigging constantly 3 or 4 days a week is the only way to stay sharp and stay good at what you do. I and probably quite a few other acts have had the opportunity to find out how true that is. And because I was doing stand-up for whatever it was, 17 years non-stop before the pandemic, when I was doing it sort of 3, 4, 5 nights a week, and then the pandemic hit, suddenly that's a massive part of a big part of your life that's gone, and you think, how long is it going to take me to get back to the level that I was at? And the truth is, if you're working away from the stage, if you're writing and going through things and thinking and putting the work in before you step on stage, it's muscle. The muscle memory is incredible. You're straight back into it. You're as good as you were 6 months ago as soon as you stay on stage, provided you've been doing the work off stage. So that was a revelation to me, an incredible thing to discover. And I think when I went back on stage at Comedy Unleashed a few weeks ago, I hadn't done a gig for, I don't know, months and months, I think, and but it just felt like I'd been on stage the night before. And I think there's a thing about having done stand-up for a long stretch of time, for 17 years, that you're so comfortable in your own voice, and you're so aware of what it is that you do that works, that you can get on stage with material, the untested stuff you've never done anywhere else, and you know it's going to push the buttons and it's going to get a reaction. So that's been an interesting discovery for me, because I very rarely gig, for partly because of the politics of the industry, and I'd have to do a lot of I think it would take negotiation for some venues to put me on, even though I can sell tickets, but partly because it's not really conducive to how my life is outside of stand-up, where I've got a 7-year-old, and a lot of my time necessitates me being around for her, and that's where I want to be as well. That's what I want to be doing, and I'd rather be doing that than the stand-up gigs. But it's nice to know that I don't have to compromise when I do get back on stage, and that as long as I'm doing the work away from the stage, that I'm not going to stand up on stage and be rusty and a sort of a sort of weaker version of what I used to be when I was gigging more regularly, because under those circumstances you wouldn't really want to be doing it. You think, I can't do this all the time, so when I am doing it, I want to be as good as I've always been, or better, otherwise there's no point. So there you go, very long-winded answer to a simple question, but...
No, it's great. No, there's loads of stuff in there. I mean, well, like I say, one of the few things I can watch is Comedy Unleashed and people like you, so I watched your whole set. It was great, and you were straight back into it, and it was so funny, and there was so many great bits. And I came back and did a one-off at Comedy Unleashed just before Jordan Peterson. I came on just before Jordan Peterson, and I was back in the zone. I was like, I'm so good at this. I was like back in the zone, and I was like, wow. I actually said in the moment, I'm so good at this. Now, whether I because that's part of my act to say stupid stuff like that and be an idiot. But and then Peterson struggled to follow me. He came on, and Dominic Frisby introduced him and said, we've got a young man here who wants to do a set. And Peterson came and said, I wouldn't exactly call this a set, but that was like the only joke he did. After that, he just did a children's poem. I was like, bro, you're going to follow Nick Dixon with a children's poem? It didn't go so well for him.
That was a great impression of Jordan Peterson. Never thought of you as an impressionist, but that was excellent. That was
Mate, I've got tools. I don't even use them. I've started doing it on my other podcast as a kind of bit, but it's it was so funny on the night. Everyone was saying to me, "Are you going to do your Jordan Peterson? Do your Jordan Peterson?" Like in front of him. Like imagine that you haven't done a gig for 5 months, you're coming back and you just do a new bit about Jordan Peterson with him in the crowd. And just before I went on, Andrew Dorr came up to me and said, "You're not going to do that Jordan Peterson thing." I was like, "Don't worry, bro, I'm not going to do it." But when one thing you said that I wanted to pick up there, I mean, yeah, I was the same as you, gigging all the time. I mean, I was doing top secret comedy, all these good clubs. Maybe I was lucky because I was doing it sometimes like 7 times a week or whatever it was, something mad, more than that sometimes, and gave it all up, as you said. But I just wanted to pick on one thing you said where you said I hit a brick wall, not to make it about me, but is it because when I got in my mini cancellation, which pales in comparison to your cancellations, which we'll get onto, it was more of a pile on my thing. But my thing was, people on the internet were saying, well, you're just shit. And that's an obvious charge. You're crap, so you can't get anywhere. So I'm not sure if I did hit a brick wall, if I just didn't want to do it anymore. So can a comic still just make it if they're really good? I mean, like, say someone like Sean Walsh, who is a friend of mine, but I don't advertise it because I don't want to get him in trouble. But he did also get cancelled for kissing someone on the dancing show where everyone kisses someone. But he came back now, and he's back. But the reason I use him is, like, he's so talented that when I see someone like him on stage, I'm like, this guy's meant to do this. He's born to do it. I can get away with it. I'm a writer. I can mumble out my jokes, and I have a certain delivery. But there are certain people that are so talented. So is it just that I was too crap, or people are crap, or is there really politics just preventing? Could a Michael McIntyre even get through? Or would you just hit this political wokeness of the industry?
I don't think the industry. Well, it's an awkward one to confront, but I think you have to talk about it in terms of equality and diversity box ticking, because that's the agenda of the industry right now, and it's not really about who's funny and who's not. It's about representation. And you might agree with that, or you might not, but it doesn't really appeal to me. I want to work in an industry where, regardless of what boxes I might or might not happen to tick, I'm going to progress on merit or not. Otherwise, it's meaningless. I want to feel like whatever I'm doing, if I achieve something, if it's because I was good. I was good and I worked hard and I was, and I developed my skills and I earned it. If I get given something that I know is just because I'm ticking a box or filling a political space, then there's not much self-worth in there for me. I would say, and there's definite points in my comedy career where the 17 years before the pandemic, where there's moments where you've worked for something and you develop skills and you've got it and you feel great about it, and there's moments where you get something for political reasons and you think, this doesn't really mean very much to me. So I think my first big sort of opportunity in doing stand-up in television was Michael McIntyre's Comedy Roadshow, for which I did the second series. Now, the first series of that, Michael McIntyre's Comedy Roadshow, the acts that got selected to be on that first series of that show, which for anyone who's not aware of what it was or didn't watch it at the time, was a showcase was marketed as a showcase of the best emerging comedians on the UK circuit, as selected and put together by Michael McIntyre. Now, the first series of that, which I wasn't on, I was on the second series. The first series of acts were cherry picked for the show. So whoever it might be, Michael McIntyre's agents off the curb in conjunction with the production company who produced the show, cherry-picked a number of acts by negotiating with various agents of other acts, decided who was going to be on the show. So if that was me getting on the show because my agent had done a deal because of the politics of the industry, then I would think, doesn't really mean much to me. I don't really feel good about it. There's other people out there who are not on it who could probably at the time might have been able to, might have deserved to be on it to a great degree, but that wasn't the case for me. I was on the second series, for which there'd been so much dissatisfaction amongst acts over the first series that had been cherry-picked, that for the second series they decided they were going to audition people. So, I went along and auditioned. I think 100 or more comics auditioned for the show, and I went along and I auditioned, and on the night I got a bigger reaction than any of the other acts on the audition, and so I got offered the gig because, I got the biggest reaction in the room, the biggest laughs, and so there's merit to that. And it's the same when I got offered. I did a full 10-week series of stand up for the week on Channel 4, for which they had a showcase, or an audition for which a number of acts had to audition. And again, I went on, and the idea was you were supposed to go on at the audition and do topical material about whatever had happened in the news, whatever was current. And every other act auditioning on the night I auditioned bottled it and just went on and did their regular set that they'd been doing for whatever 2 or 3 years of all the sort of tried and tested jokes. And I was the only one who went on with current affairs topical material, and I still did better. I'd got a bigger reaction of laughter out of everyone, out of the audience, than the acts that had gone on and done their tried and tested stuff. And I still didn't get the gig after that. I had to wait, because of politics, I had to wait another series, and then they offered it to me after that. But again, that was something that I was able to say, I earned this the hard way. But there were other moments where I got selected. I got asked to go and do the Montreal Just for Laughs Comedy Festival, to perform in New Faces without auditioning. And I think, well, that's just because my agent at the time had big connections to that festival, and sort of blagged me into it. Not that I ever wanted to go, but, and so I'd get it, I'd think, well, what am I doing here? Not that I wasn't tremendously lucky to have that experience, but it's like, this isn't right, but you go and do it anyway. I think, but to your point, I think that there's no way of progressing on merit anymore. And I think if you happen to be a straight white man and you're not ticking, in which case you're not ticking any boxes, any equality and diversity boxes that the UK comedy industry want you to tick, you don't, there's no progression for you unless you're doing your own thing online. The comedy industry, as it is, won't help you. And it won't give you opportunities. But if you're someone who builds a following on social media, on TikTok or YouTube or whatever, then, and you haven't, and you're not upsetting and you're not going against the political agenda of the industry, then you can get, as long as you've demonstrated an ability to sell tickets, then you can get tour bookings. So someone like Mark Simmons, who does well on TikTok, as far as I'm aware, he's a straight white guy, and he's very non-political material, just sort of one-liners. Because he's done well on TikTok, he can sell tickets in theatres, and so he can get bookings. But beyond that, the industry will do nothing for him. He'll get no TV opportunities, nothing like that. Someone like Josh Pugh, who does well on Twitter, he does little sketches. Again, by building a following through that, he's able to sell theatres, and because he's demonstrated an ability to sell tickets. And again, his comedy is very innocuous, non-political, and very sort of very, very nothing in there that could offend anybody potentially. So there are ways forward, but by and large, it's if you're going into stand-up comedy these days, I think you have to be looking at it from a perspective of representation and say, I'm this, I tick these boxes, and so they might be looking for someone to put in that, that ticks those boxes, to put in this on this panel of people or in this TV show for the sake of diversity and inclusivity. And it doesn't matter that I haven't really, I'm only really just an open spot comedian, and as long as I've got the confidence and conviction to blag it, then I'll be fine. And I think that's what constitutes most of the comedy that's on TV and radio right now, such as it is, but that's all legacy media anyway, and there's an argument to suggest that is that a waste of time for comedians anyway, going down the TV or radio route. But it's a complex issue, I think. I mean, did you feel like, you spoke about encountering a certain degree of nastiness online, anonymous trolls saying, oh, you're no good, you're not funny. I mean, is that what put you off moving forward or trying to pursue it any further? Or did you feel like the politics of the industry would be an impediment?
I wish it was just anonymous trolls. I mean, some of them were famous comedians throwing me under the bus, like Jason Manford, who I'd always been really nice to. He was actually cancelled for an indiscretion, lost a job, said he was actually suicidal about it occasionally. But yet, despite that, he still threw me under the bus at my most vulnerable time, which I think is profoundly evil. But people like him and Richard Herring were attacking me, and all these comedians were attacking me. So that was one thing. Certainly didn't help. I actually don't know. It was sort of a gradual process where I actually don't know if that was the final straw for me, or if it was just that I hated the normal circuit, or if it was just a combination of all the things. I really don't, it was a sort of combination of things, I think. And if I went back now, I would try and just do my own show. We were doing this live show with the podcast. I would just do my own show, and it's kind of irrelevant whether I do the circuit or not, the normal club circuit, because, like you say, you get a following from other things. You go back on, you'll get back into the zone. Doing things like Free Speech Nation with a live audience keeps you in the zone anyway. So my TV work keeps me semi in the zone, so I could come back and potentially do my own stand-up show. I'm not completely ruling it out. But yeah, there was a number of things that put me off. What's funny is, by the way, on your McIntyre point, because there's so many things you said there, I know for a fact that McIntyre is someone who tries to keep standards on his show and has resisted some of this diversity stuff with his more recent shows, where they've tried to say, let's have this guy, and he's been like, no, not good enough, which is good. But, and it's so funny that you talk about merit. I mean, one thing, people might laugh at this, but the best I ever felt in comedy was the Comedy Store Gong Show 1 year into comedy. I'd been doing comedy 1 year, 1 day off, 1 year exactly. And I'd come up and do this Gong Show, and if people don't know, you're at the Comedy Store, there's 400 people there in the audience, and the audience can hold up 3 yellow cards, and if you get 3 cards, you get a gong, and you have to go off the stage. So it's brutal, but I loved it because it was like a test of merit, since you're talking about merit. And you do these open mic rooms with like mentally ill people, and it's a small room, the whole audience is comics, no one can tell who's any good. You suspect you're better than the other people, it's hard to prove it, whereas that was like a perfect, fair test. And I win the thing, I get a crown, I get several agents want to represent me, other people lose, I'm like, this is how comedy should be. I never felt any better than that. That was the peak for me, because, like you, I had the perhaps naive dream of merit. I wanted to find, for some reason, I thought this will be an environment where everything's based on merit, because it's very hard to find that in life. And for some reason, I was looking for the same thing as you, and like you say, you don't really want something if you're just handed it, and you just want to be tested. For some reason, it seems like we're similar in that. I don't know if everyone's like that. We just want to be tested in a fair playing field. And I'm glad, by the way, Mark's doing well. Mark Simmons. I didn't know he was now a Tory, and that's great. He's a nice guy. But when you first got cancelled the first time, which people might not even know about, for this rant you did online, whatever you want to call it, a post about where you told the truth about panel shows, which was always a mistake, and you basically said it's diversity quotas. It's funny, you were talking about merit even then, so this idea about merit has obviously been a big deal for you, and you were frustrated then that people are booking on a box-ticking system. And so what? Maybe you could say something about that. And when did you first notice that, by the way? Because I'll just quickly add another thing. I was in the... Hang on, I'm starting to hear an echo of myself. That's putting me off. All right, it's gone. I was in a competition called So You Think You're Funny, which is like all the biggest comedians you've heard of were in the final, or they won it, or whatever. Peter Kay, whoever you want to name, and I was in the final. And that year, and I've been going like a year in comedy, and that year was the first year when they had an all-female judging panel. I was called misogynist in the review. Other people across the Edinburgh Festival were getting called misogynist. And I was like, oh, this has changed. And of course, a woman won it, and she may have been good, but there was a woman in it who, like, should she really be in this? She seemed like too advanced already. And she won it, and it was all-female judging. So it was the first year that they said, like, it has to be a woman. And now everyone thinks that's normal. Go, yeah, of course. But like before then, we didn't actually have diversity. It was just like, yeah, men have won this for 20 years in a row, and then occasionally a woman if they were good. And now that seems like you're sort of a Nazi for saying that, because we've accepted and internalized this idea of quotas. But it's not really an idea we had before. We just had the idea of merit. So sorry, it's a very long rant, but what? Yeah. So what does merit mean to you? And what about that post? What were you thinking when you posted this thing back in, I think, 2014, where you said this thing about the industry? And that was your first cancellation.
Well, I think when I put this post up on Facebook, it was me trying to push myself in, push my boundaries in terms of what I was doing creatively and comedically, and trying to find progress for myself and become a better version of the comedian that I was. And I think, you know, online is a great medium for that, and social media and streaming platforms are, I think, are fantastic for taking risks and developing. And you know, you would hope that the arts industries, the comedy industry, would embrace that as well and say, all right, well, you know, I think comedians are going to try stuff out online. Some of it might work, some of it might not. But I think the kind of old school comedy industry, the agents, the managers, the promoters are a little bit threatened by, incredibly threatened by the fact that acts can emerge and rise and build a very strong following online on their own, and that they don't need agents and managers actually. And the threat of that, of course, is that the acts that the agents and managers take on, you know, at any time, whatever work they're doing for those acts, there's a merit to what comedians are doing online. What comedians are doing online, there's a lot of that works on merit. If it's funny or interesting, it's going to get traction. And a way for this kind of old school industry to react against that and to try and control that is to put these censorious rules in place about, you know, what you should and shouldn't say, what you can and can't do in comedy. This big set of rules, this new set of rules, which seem to come in at the same time as comics were starting to do things online. It's about control, really. It's about the people that run the industry, these agents, the venue bookers, the promoters saying, well, we're in charge. We say what you can and can't do. And if you don't abide by our rules in terms of what constitutes acceptable comedy, then you're out. We'll we don't care if you can sell tickets. We'll make sure the venues don't book you anyway. So, yeah, I think when I put this post up on Facebook, which in a nutshell I said, this was in 2014, so 2 years before the Brexit vote, I said that I thought Mock the Week were doing an incredible number of jokes constantly about UKIP that I felt were a little bit out of touch, because there was a substantial contingent of the population who were quite sort of disgruntled at the current state of things, and were quite, to which, to whom the sort of principles of politics of UKIP appealed. You know, the idea of leaving the EU and the idea that mass uncontrolled immigration had become a problem for the country, and that within the post I talked about panel shows and the comedians on them being out of touch in the way that they constantly attacked UKIP, which, you know, was correct at the time, because, you know, we were building towards this moment, this Brexit vote in referendum in 2016, and this ill feeling was building and building, and we felt like we were only ever getting one side of a cultural narrative on shows like that. But there was that caused a lot of uproar, and it doesn't seem like much to say now. It seems like, well, it seems like not really something that people would care that much about, but at the time it was enough to mean that I kind of had to start again and work my way up from the bottom, doing sort of opening clubs and then headlining again and then back out on tour, whereas before that I'd been an established touring act. I was sort of put on the naughty step and made to start again, and I kind of worked my way back up over from 2014, and funnily enough, just before the pandemic hit, my tour sales had really rocketed, and things were really taking off for me. I thought, all right, I've done a lot of work to get back here, and it's fantastic. This is all about to pay off. But then, of course, you know, you don't think, you think, right, I can carry on what I'm doing, but the idea that it could happen a second time, when people know, well, this is who he is, this is the sort of humour he does, but then for people to do it to you again and to put you back on that naughty step and say, right, well, you can start again if you want, back to square one, and go back to the clubs and prove yourself again. Well, you know what, that's incredibly difficult doing that once. The first time you do it, the first time you work your way up, it's incredibly difficult. The second time, it's more difficult, because you've got to control your ego as well, saying, well, hang on a second, I've done this, I've proved myself, you know how good I am, why are you making me jump through the hoops? But you do it anyway. Third time, it's you know, I may well have done that again, because this has always been what I wanted to do, and all I've ever done since I was in my early 20s, and when I was a kid, it's what I dreamed of doing, stand-up comedy, so I've always been all in with it. And so whatever it takes, even if people want to do that to me and sabotage my career and put me back to square one, I'll do it again. And at the end of the day, you know, I knew I wouldn't be held back, because my ability has always been there. I mean, I've always been good. You know, I never had to work at it. When I started, straight away, no gigs. The first few gigs that I did, were So You Think You're Funny, and I ended up coming second in the final of So You Think You're Funny, and then I probably hadn't done more than about, 50 gigs when I won the BBC New Comedy Award, and then nominated for the new Best Newcomer Edinburgh Comedy Award, and then the following year the main award, and then auditioned for McIntyre's Roadshow, got that, auditioned for this BBC Three sitcom Ideal, I was in 3 series of that, auditioned for Stand Up for the Week on Channel 4, 4 series of that, and then, off the back of those other TV stuff, Live at the Apollo, when Live at the Apollo actually meant something to be on it, before it became a kind of just a sort of equality, diversity showcase rather than a comedy show. And all these things that I did, and I knew that I'd achieved so much of this on merit, because I'd been on at gigs with people and auditions with people, when in front of a room full of an audience, a big room full of people, I got the bigger laughs and the more consistent laughs. And so, you know, I may well have done that again and started again from square one, but I didn't need to, because during the pandemic I built an online following and found a way to monetize that and was enjoying that. So I was able to sit back and say, do you know what? I'm not playing this game anymore. The politics of the comedy industry are extreme, and I'm just telling jokes, and you want to politicize what I'm doing and pretend that I've got some sort of political agenda, wherein all I've ever done is try to make people laugh, whether it be with what I've tweeted or what I've said on stage or what I've put on YouTube. It's always been about finding what's funny, and I think I can't play the game with the comedy industry where they want to politicize everything I do and every element of the industry, really, and set a big and make this big set of rules that we're all supposed to follow. Because ultimately, as a comedian, when someone puts a load of rules in front of you that you're supposed to follow, the funniest thing you can do is break those rules. If the audience is aware you're supposed to be following these rules, and if you're aware as a comedian you're supposed to be following these rules, the best possible thing you can do for comedy, the funniest thing you can do, is piss all over those rules and disrespect them. And if you're a comedian, who's worth their salt, who's got any ability at all, you're going to be incredibly drawn to that. So yeah, it's, for me, it's about trying to find a way forward with stand-up that's beyond the industry, finding a way around the industry to still get out there and do tours and do live dates, and I'm quite patient about that, and I think it will come. And I've still got a long stretch in front of me to get out there and perform and do tours, and it's coming, but I just need to be patient. So there you go. No idea what your original question was, but
sorry, it was more of a comment. It was
brain dump there.
No, it's great. There's so many things I want to reply to. I don't know which path to go down, but of course, comedians want to break rules. I mean, now we have the opposite. Leo Kurtz would call them milk monitors. We just have people who we have groupthink, we have people grassing each other up, we have a kind of disgusting bullying groupthink. I mean, it's people like you and me, I guess, got into it as rebellious type people. We want to, and funny type people. And it's just not about that, as you say. It's about the opposite, weirdly. It's a weird activist group that's taken over. And they have to wrestle with their idea that they're the underdog. And this is something I've talked about on other shows. Things. There's this idea. Matt Goodwin has got in trouble recently for suggesting there's this woke elite that run the country. And people say, how can you say that? There's a conservative government and there's these financial interests and so on. But clearly, anyone being objective looks at the cultural sphere and says this is run by a certain mentality, and they've won, and they want to pretend they're still the rebels, but they're so plainly not. And if you have a rebellious spirit or a comedic spirit, you inevitably end up on the other side because you're pushing against this new orthodoxy, and it's people like you and me doing it. But I'm doing it in stand-up anymore. But I mean, that's to me absolutely obvious. Of course, it could go too far where it's just like now that's in its own box and it's sort of so-called right-wing comedy or something. That wouldn't be right either. The comedian has to push against everything. You just did a recent video about the coronation that would be very offensive to people who are pro-monarchy, but you're like, you just attack everything. And you've always done that, actually. I watched a video of you years ago. I don't know how it's even possible because we're not that different in age, but I feel like it was when I was at school, but I don't think that can be possible. It must have been later. You were attacking sort of so-called chavs, but you were also attacking posh people, and it was like a brilliant rant. You've been doing this your whole career, except when you were doing songs when you first started. But what was really interesting there to me as well, this thing you said about when you did this rant in 2014 or this online post, and it was basically panel shows are all rigged and we need diversity. And by the way, UKIP have a point, and immigration. I mean, you're saying now that sounds like quite normal. To me, that sounds mad that you ever said it. In this sense, the average person in the population, of course, is basically now saying, yeah, immigration is an issue. illegal and legal immigration. That's a very mainstream view now. You know, obviously politicians haven't done much about it, but millions of people would agree with that. But what seems crazy to me, if I look at it from a sort of, I obviously think you should say what you want, but if I was to look at it through the lens of being tactical or careful or careerist, I would say, hang on, Andrew's gone in pretty hard there. He's gone like, there's all these people on panel shows who shouldn't be there. It's just diversity bollocks. And you've thrown in, for good measure, UKIP have a point. And you've thrown in immigration. And you seem to have this part of yourself that just like this, and you did it again. It's interesting to see that you think it's comedic expression, whereas it looks to a sort of another person that like just crazy. So you got called mentally ill, even by people vaguely on our side. They were saying to me, "Oh, you know, Andrew's, well, he's just mentally ill." I was like, "Is he? He's very high function if he is. I mean, he's a high level comic." And some of the people telling me hadn't done that well themselves, like, he's done much better than you. He's like, you know, a touring comic. He's very hard working. I'm like, "You sure he's mentally ill?" And it's like, it was this concern trolling, and Stuart Lee did it and said, "Oh, I think Andrew's gone mentally ill." So my sort of question I'm building to is how come you end up doing these things? So the second one you did was it was after the Euros, and we'd lost on the penalties. England had lost, and the white players had scored the penalties, and the black players had missed them. So you sort of weighed on Twitter, and I said to you at the time, like, it was kind of a mad thing because at the time on Twitter, you couldn't say anything even vaguely negative about Rashford or the other players. The only comment allowed, it was like a febrile atmosphere. You had to just be saying Rashford is a hero and legend. If you'd have said something like, "I don't think Rashford's that good," you'd have been piled on. But you went in with like a joke about, you know, only the white players, you know, black people can't do penalties. I don't want to badly paraphrase your joke, but it was like the most febrile time. And then you went in just double-footed, to use a football analogy. And then you double down, which is what you do in comedy. You do a tag and the audience don't like it, so or they get ooh, and you do another one. You do a tag and you hit it harder, which you also did. And in your mind, you're just doing what a comedian should do. But the outside world, you're like Andrew Lawrence makes racist statement. So I don't know what was going. So what were you thinking with that first post and with that second post? And surely you expected, let's say, I mean, you can never really know when you're going to get cancelled, actually, when you're on the inside of it. But did you expect, is a better question, any of that blowback?
I think I've got my weakness is one of my weaknesses is dishonesty. I've got a real low tolerance threshold for dishonest behaviour, and I think the whole tournament had been hijacked, the Euros, and it had been made about race, and the whole tournament, it was for some reason a constant discussion about race when we're supposed to be watching people at a difficult time, at a time where we're just starting to emerge from a pandemic. And just give people some entertainment, let them watch football. The whole tournament was about race and racism in English football and Black Lives Matter, which always to me seemed extraordinary that this movement was so huge in this country. The Black Lives Matter movement, which was entirely, it came out of the police murder of George Floyd in America. This is a completely different culture, a different continent, different place, a completely different history, a relationship between black people and the police. And for that to somehow, the idea that can be applied to British culture, to me, was incredibly dishonest. But also the idea of there being a huge problem, this massive problem with racism in English football, which there was in the late 70s, the 80s. But that was a lie as well, because where, there might be occasional episodes of that. This is not a big problem in English football, but the narrative of the tournament was that, this is ubiquitous, it's happening everywhere all the time, and constantly the slogan splashed up on screen, hate won't win. It's like, well, where is this hate? This is that you're talking about. This is contrivance. This is something you're whipping up. You're summoning up by you're creating this monster that doesn't exist. And all these commentators and pundits sort of feeling compelled to go off on this diatribe about racism because all the players on the pitch are taking a knee for BLM. The entire tournament was about race, just as it felt like the World Cup last year was about gay rights in Qatar. It felt like the whole thing had been hijacked for this sort of for political reasons. But the Euros was entirely about race, the whole tournament. And then in the final, England played Italy, and it went to penalties. And the England manager selected 5 players, and the first 2 were white, and they'd scored their penalties, and the last 3 were black, and they all missed their penalties. And suddenly, no one wanted to talk about race anymore. So suddenly, it's off the table. I thought, well, hang on, we can acknowledge this. There's something funny there, and funny about the fact that people are so awkward and desperate to avoid the subject within the TV commentary. And so I went on Twitter. I wrote, all I'm saying is the white guy scored, and this instant confected outrage from people. So I embedded the original tweet, and I said I can see this has upset some people. So I just want to say sorry that black people are bad at penalties. Sorry that black guys are bad at penalties, it's hugely amusing for a lot of people, and it riled other people, made other people furious to the extent that they thought we're going for this guy now, and in the next day I spoke to my agent, and he said, maybe you should take it down and give an apology. I said, no, not really, because if I do that, then I have to do comedy on other people's terms, and it's not worth it to me. If I was, if you decided to be, or if you've had the opportunity to be one of these sort of light entertainment TV comedians, if you've had the opportunity to be a Russell Howard and you're making millions and millions of pounds and touring arenas, then you can do comedy on other people's terms. Let other people dictate to you what you can and can't be. But on a level where there's a million other things I can do to earn money, the only worth in doing comedy is that I get to do what I want to do, and the freedom is the freedom to do that is the only thing that makes it worthwhile. So that had to be the end of my relationship with that agent, and all these tour venues where I'd sold out tour dates, decided to that they were going to pull the tour dates for sort of whatever it was, 40 tour dates, probably a lot of income, a huge amount of income, but it was the only way, because there's no point for me in doing comedy any other way than the way that I want to do it. It's joyless. I remember I changed what I did earlier in my career so I could get certain TV opportunities that I wanted to do, largely for the money, because I needed the money. I didn't have any money for a long time, and I knew if I diluted what I was doing and made it a lot more bland, I knew that I could get onto live at the Apollo, and I did. And I remember standing behind that big neon sign that lifts up all the smoke, live at the Apollo, and I stood there and I just felt empty. I thought, I don't really care about this. I went on, great set, and I worked very hard to put it together, and it went really well, but I was just empty, hollow feeling because I wasn't doing what I wanted to do. So even though the money I made from that, it's not a huge amount of money, but it was enough for me to get a deposit together to get a mortgage on my first house. It allowed me to stop renting. So it was worth it. But there comes a point when money is not the most important thing. There's only so much money I need. I'd rather do the comedy I want to do, and if that means it has to be online, and that because what I say offends the sensibilities or the politics of influential people within the comedy industry, then so be it. But I'll come back when the wheel turns and the venues see this guy can sell a lot of tickets, and they start booking me again. I'll go back to doing the live stuff. But if online, if YouTube and streaming sites, social media is the only place where I can do what I want to do, and I can make the living I need to make from it and support my family and put food on my table for my daughter and take her and do the things she wants to do and take little holidays, and then that's enough for me, because I'm not going to compromise on the sort of comedy I want to do for the sake of a woke comedy industry that wants me to subscribe to their political agenda, I guess. So, that's those were those were the terms under which I made those posts, or that and there are any number. You could go through my Twitter, and you could probably find hundreds of tweets which will make me equally as cancelable as the one that people latched onto. There, probably once a week, twice a week, I might put something up that could be cancelled for. So, but I can do that because I don't have to worry about being cancelled. If you're a comedian, you're out working the clubs, or the theatre circuit, and doing your own tour shows. If you've got an agent within the industry, if you're reliant on TV work, you're operating in a culture of fear. Your first thought is not what's funny. Your first thought is, what am I allowed to say? And then with the parameters of what they're allowed to say, they try and create comedy and fail. That's what, one of the main employers of comedians these days is GB News. It doesn't seem to exist in a lot of other places, does it?
I know, and we get criticised and told we're not proper comedians somehow. People try and take away your credentials. Someone told a colleague of mine in a green room that, Nick's not a proper comedian, he's just one of these GB News. It's like, well, he did weekends at the Comedy Store. The guy saying it never did weekends at the Comedy Store. They took away my 11 years, took away all my gigs in Preston, Frog and Bucket, and 5-hour night coaches from Leeds Hi-Fi. I've lost all that, and apparently I didn't do that. It's like, mate, I can tell you, I earned my... Anyway, well, nothing now because I've quit. But I mean, you're right, Andrew. Just be cancelled is what I recommend. Cancel yourself early on. Then you're just free, because I work with cancelled people. I'm on an entire cancelled channel, basically. So it's like, that means that it's kind of hard to cancel because I'm pre-cancelled. Toby's going to stop working with me. He was cancelled from 5 public positions. GB News, which is boycotted by advertisers, and everyone hates it. So it's like, pre-cancel yourself. But a few things I wanted to pick up on. BLM, you're right. The whole tournament was about BLM, and it was very disingenuous because Sky were claiming that they started pivoting to going, oh, this is actually just about racism in general and kicking out racism out of football, which no one had a problem with. But it wasn't, because they kept displaying the BLM logo all over the screen and all over the advertising hoardings. It was a complete lie. And the other thing I wanted to say, didn't you talked about your agency dropped you, or you felt you had to leave your agency after they told you to take down the tweet. But didn't other comedians at the agency also pressure them to get rid of you?
Yeah, that's right. That was one of their acts, one of their as they described, their high-profile acts. Phoned them up and said they would leave. That act would leave the agency unless they dropped me, and that was, my agent phoned me up and said, "This is what they've said to me." I said, "Well, that's the way it's got to be then." It's up to you if you want to bow to that sort of pressure. But unless I was prepared to apologise and become this comedian that constantly second guesses themselves and say, "Oh, I don't want to offend anyone. What am I allowed to say?" Unless I wanted to do that, he wasn't going to. He would. He didn't want to jeopardise his relationship with this other act. So there was no way forward. Having said that, find a way of putting this kindly, it wasn't. It was by no means the biggest loss in the world for me.
Right.
It was. It wasn't as if they were. They were. They were doing much for me anyway.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because you'd already left a much bigger agent earlier on in one of your other.
Well, that was interesting. I was with a very powerful, although a small but very, very powerful, influential agency, and I sat down with my agent there at the Edinburgh Festival, at the end of one Edinburgh Festival, and this was about 2013. So things were brewing then, and she said to me, "The stuff you're doing on the stage and the stuff you're putting on social media, Andrew." And it always seemed odd to me. She said, "People are a little bit scared. People are a little bit scared of you." And she said, I can't really protect you," which I didn't realise at the time. I thought, this sounds quite odd.
It sounds like the mafia.
Yeah, it does, doesn't it? And it sounded really odd to me. And I said to her, "Well, yeah, I see the industry going this political direction, and I it's difficult for me to be on board with that." And she said, "Well, that I am on board with it. I'm one of them. This is my I am one of those people." So and that was quite a long term. I'd been with them quite a while. They were good, really good, but I think that was probably the start of things across the arts, across the culture, across the cultural sphere in the UK, maybe about 2013. That's when things were starting to brew a little bit. So I didn't really understand it at the time because I was doing really well actually, and smashing these gigs and selling tickets on tour and TV and radio, and suddenly this agent didn't want to continue to work with me after that conversation. So, and I thought, well, it's no problem for me because I will, I'll do what I like. I know I'm good at what I do, and it's fine. But that always sticks in my head, that conversation, because at the time it seemed such a strange conversation. Yeah, but I, as I said, I've got a problem with dishonesty, and fair play is very important to me, and I don't like the people getting opportunities because they've ticked boxes, equality and diversity boxes, and then those same people being promoted as if they're these incredible comedic talents. When the reality is very obvious to everyone, to audiences watching, to the rapidly diminishing audiences from about 2014 that were watching live at the Apollo. I don't know if they even make it anymore, but even the people turning up for recordings, you could see if you watch some more recent series, the theatre's not full. They can't fill the venue. Not enough people want to come and see it recorded live, and they push it back later and later into a later spot. First of all, it went from BBC One to BBC Two, and later and later slot, and it is purely and simply an equality and diversity showcase rather than a comedy showcase. But they won't call it that. They want to say this is a showcase of the best talent in UK comedy, which is not, and none of these similar shows are. So I really dislike the dishonesty of that, even if and it's easy for people to say, "Oh, you're just bitter." Well, I've done it. I've done that. I've kind of done most of what there is to do in stand-up comedy, but I also see a lot of other people, younger people, doing it really, really good, who've got absolutely no chance. No chance. And I came through at a different time when I did have chances, and that stopped after a while because of the politics of the industry. I see people coming through; they're not getting the chance. It doesn't matter how good they are; they're being denied that, and people are being dishonest and saying, "No, this person because," and I don't like that. And I think there's an element. I think there's a class issue to it as well, because what's great, or what should be great about stand-up comedy, is that it's accessible for everyone. You don't need anything. You don't need anything to do it. You just need yourself, your voice, your brain, and you need a room to stand in, and a microphone. And if you have the talent and you work hard, it doesn't matter where you come from. You can be great at doing that, doing stand-up comedy. And you can progress on merit, but all that counts for nothing in an industry that doesn't recognise merit. And so here's the thing: you could have heterosexual white guy from an incredibly poor background, maybe he's been raised in care or something, incredibly poor background, and he starts doing stand-up comedy, and he's incredible. And you could have a black female comedian who identifies as queer, whose parents were doctors, who went to private school and went to Oxford University, who's had every privilege life could give her, starts doing stand-up, and she's not that great. She's quite confident because of her background. She's got a lot of confidence. And that act will progress despite not doing very well, not being very good. But the guy, the heterosexual white guy from the very poor circumstances, who's incredibly good, will not progress because he doesn't tick the right boxes. So there's a class issue at play there, as well, which is connected with the merit side of things. You need to let whatever industry, whatever walk of life, you need to let people progress on merit, because otherwise I don't see how, as a society in general, you can achieve great things. Because why would people push themselves? Why do people push themselves to their full potential if they feel like they can't progress on merit? There's no reason to. So there's all that to it for me. All that's inside my head when I push against this stuff. So yeah, there it is.
Yeah, there's so much there. I was just trying to find. There was this thing with on meritocracy recently. Someone has written a book about it actually, and I'm just trying to remember his name. But he was saying that it's Adrian Wooldridge, and he was saying that meritocracy wasn't perfect, but it was getting there, and it was addressing things. It didn't have everything perfect, but it was on the path. And then we just abandoned it for this wokeness. We abandoned it for this so-called equity and all this nonsense, and that was the end of that. Whereas, as you said, meritocracy. If you don't have meritocracy, you have a sort of Soviet system. You have corruption. You have nothing to aim for. You have this weird snakes and ladders system where you get to the top and you're suddenly at the bottom for some indiscretion, as happened to you, and nothing can function without it. So I absolutely believe that. And it's interesting as well. You talked about it used to be the best people on the Apollo and so on. Then it became not that, and you couldn't stand the dishonesty. My take on that was that the BBC recognised that stand-up was quite cheap to make and it was quite effective. They had Michael McIntyre and they could appeal to huge amounts of people and get these big viewing figures. Then they looked at it in their ideological lens and said, this is too good not to use as propaganda. This is my little theory. I mean, they thought, okay, now we've got to start making this all equal and blah, blah. It's like, it was supposed to be about who's funny. It was just a little medium. Why does comedy, I've always said this, and this is one of the things I got sort of mini cancelled for. Why does comedy have to be about perfect representation? It's like, it just make it like a sport was my crazy idea. Like, have the best person, judge people as individuals, make it like a sport where it's like you can come from any background in the way you mentioned. If you're good, you'll get there. If you're not, you won't. Why does it have to be represented? It's not politics. These people aren't elected representatives. It's just they happen to have this weird skill and this weird interest, and it's making people laugh. And it's like, there's no reason on earth that should be perfectly representative. To me, that's completely mad. And why would it be? You know, it's like, I don't get it at all. It's like, how we need perfect representation in archery. Do we? Just get the people who can hit the middle of the thing with the arrow. Like, I think it's insane. But we agree on that. And as we probably do on a lot. But
well, the industry agrees with it too, and they know it's not right. That's why people like me and other people who make jokes about it and jokes at their expense, you get punished in the harshest possible terms, because
they feel bad on some sort of level. What do you mean?
They know they know they're frauds. They know the whole thing's a lie. The whole thing's based on dishonesty, and so people start making jokes. It's the same thing as the corrupt king chopping off the jester's head. It gets a little bit too close to the target. They know this is dishonesty and corruption, the way they're dealing with people, and it's a culture of fear. A lot of people just protecting their livelihoods in the comedy industry, and that's very easy to understand. People have got families. It's an unstable profession. The jobs, it's unregulated, a lot of these jobs, so people just toe the line. And then there are people in positions of influence and power who abuse their privileges and push this agenda. And the consequence of that is this very toxic, poisonous industry, which is very, very sad, because it's about bringing joy and laughter into people's lives. That should be what it's about, and it should be accessible to all. That's the foundations and ethos of it, is that you don't need anything to do it. You don't. You just your voice, your ideas, a microphone, and a room full of anyone who wants to listen to it. And it's very sad. I mean, just recently, the whole Barry Humphries thing, where 4 years ago, he was treated disgustingly by the Melbourne International Comedy Festival, the big award at the Melbourne International Comedy Festival, the Barry Award, named after Barry Humphries, because he's Australia's greatest comedic export, without a doubt, one of the best of all time. One of the greatest comedians of all time, for me, certainly, I would say. And his name was taken off that award, that Barry Award, and by the Melbourne International Comedy Festival, because he expressed some views about people transitioning, about some trans views that the festival didn't like. And it's difficult to know the extent to which he was being he was messing around and being deliberately naughty and contrarian, which was a big part of his comedy, who he was, and how much that he meant what he had said. But it's irrelevant anyway, because the views that he expressed would been held by a large number of people. The idea that trans people undergoing surgery is a form of mutilation. A lot of people would agree with that. A lot of people wouldn't. It's a controversial thing to suggest, but to treat him in that way, for the festival to treat him in that way, whatever he was, a man in his 80s, and to kind of distance themselves from him was bad at the time. But then a few weeks ago, when he died, and the festival director, Susan Provan, who re-elects herself every 2 or 3 years as festival director, came out and gave this dishonest kind of response on social media saying, "Oh, we're going to find a way to honour Barry Humphries." No, you can keep your mouth shut because you treated him badly. Don't pretend that you have anything. You have anything to contribute here. You treated him disgracefully. A man at the end of an incredible career, one of the best comedians we've ever had at the end of a long life. You treated him disgracefully, and now you want to make out like the festival's got to embrace and celebrate him. Get in the bin.
Yeah.
But she, this is an absolute sort of paradigm for the corruption and dishonesty that exists within the industry, which is a shame.
And there was that guy, Sammy J, who was an Australian comedian who won a Barry, but then was on the board of the Barrys when they voted to change the name. It's like scum. It's the word for that. I mean, I'm sorry, like, get in the bin, as you say. I mean, just disgusting. But
a few days after Barry Humphries' death, Sammy J writing an article in, I don't know what newspaper it was, trying to justify as if it was all about him and his decision to. No one cares about you, mate. No one knows who you are. You did that. You're on a panel that decided to distance yourself, to expel this great comic and take his name off your comedy award. You did that. Live with it. No one cares anyway. No one knows who you are, Sammy J.
Yeah. Though, speaking of dishonesty, which we've talked about a lot today, the one thing about that piece was it had a weird kind of honesty that said, we did that cynically to try and attract youth who are more sympathetic to the radical trans movement, and we made a calculation. So at least they admitted it that time. It's like, yeah, we dumped him to try and get our youth numbers up at the festival. It's like, okay, you've at least admitted it. It's not good, it's awful, but at least you've said it. So funny when you talk about comedy being I say funny, I mean grimly, bleakly weird. When you say that comedy is to bring joy and laughter, as of course it is, and then you talk about your agent saying things like, I can't really protect you. I just think the average person, they're getting it now, but it's taken people a while to realise that comedy is not this, it's such a weird, sick, snaky industry. Imagine like you watch comedy and you think it's all about laughter and eccentric people having a laugh, as finding ways to make us laugh, and then you find it's like there's an agent saying, I can't really protect you, Andrew. Imagine like the dichotomy there, the disparity is so ridiculous. But there's a few things you said I wanted to pick up on, because I was going to ask if it's possible to still be a comedian, and you've sort of answered that, and you said it was very, very hard now. And we've talked about whether you almost have to choose a path. I wonder if you have to choose a path now between, okay, I'll go full woke or I'll go full cancelled. If you were starting out, because I talked to Lawrence Fox about this on his show. You can see how cancelled I am that I'm even going on Lawrence Fox's show. I mean, imagine most comedians doing that. But and it's not that I necessarily get on perfectly with everyone on my side or side, if you want to do that, but I'll talk to anyone, but Lawrence is all right. But it's like, how do we do comedy is one thing I spoke to him about in a culture of riven by politics. So as a comedians, we have to get up, or when I did do it, you have to get up in front of a random crowd around the country, and you have to extract a sort of semi-involuntary visceral reaction known as laughter, and it has to therefore be so good, but also so broad that it appeals to basically everyone in the room, or a large enough percentage that you get another gig. Very high percentage of the room. You'll always have one twat at the front staring at you, but that's just the nature of comedy. Now, how do we do that in the world now where there are so few cultural assumptions? I mean, you just touched on the trans issue. If we can't agree that mutilating young children, as I would call it, is bad, then what can we agree on? So we can agree on virtually nothing now. So how do we make a room full of people laugh? I mean, where does comedy go? Does it just go into ghettos where you do Comedy Unleashed, you can do your own tour, and then some other guy is doing the Apollo thing and doing the woke thing and saying weird activist things in their set? Can we do comedy to a broad range of people anymore, or is comedy just split because the culture is so split?
Well, I think I think it depends on people. Being comedy depends on, or good comedy depends on audiences being quite open-minded, and a culture where you can go and see some comedy and be aware that you might be offended by something a comedian says 1 minute, and then the next minute he might make you laugh your head off, or she might make you laugh your head off at something else. But the culture we exist in at the moment is that a comedian says what something 1 minute that offends you, and that's it. They've got to find a way to stop them ever doing another gig again for the rest of their lives. So that's an attitude towards comedy that needs to change amongst audiences and industry, because that's the reward of a great joke. It's about trust. There's a relationship of trust between a performer and an audience that you're not going to have the same views. No two people in the audience, any audience, are going to have the same views. And a comedian on stage, there's no point trying to pander to the views of an audience either, because that's a disparate room full of people. And I think it comes down to authenticity. If you go on stage, for me, I can see, even if I don't really like what a comedian's got to say, and I'm not particularly well disposed to their character, I can still respect what they're doing and actually laugh at their jokes if I can see authenticity in there. Someone like Hannah Gadsby, I was perfectly happy to sit through her Nanette show. I found it very absorbing, very entertaining, and there were parts of it where I laughed, but I find her worldview loathsome, and I find her to be quite an unprepossessing character. But I can see authenticity there, and that's what's important to me. If people are giving an honest account of who they are, then I can respect them and be open-minded about what they're doing, and put my own, and keep a handle on my own potential intolerances. But it's where there's dishonesty, where there's corruption, dishonesty, and people pursuing an agenda, and weak people, cowardly people pandering and existing within a culture of fear. I sort of go at that full throttle. I'm very aggressive and in the sort of withering comedy that I'm prepared to do about that. It comes down to authenticity. I think any comedian who works hard at what they do and they go on stage and they're giving a authentic version of themselves to the audience, they can do well in front of any audience. I really think that, I couldn't have less. I used to go and do these sort of jonglers gigs in front of very rowdy Friday, Saturday night audiences of drunk people, coke and very aggressive crowds and a lot of anger in the room, and never felt like I had anything in common with those people, but and dreaded the gigs. But whenever I walked on stage at these gigs, I show them who I am. I show them. I'm not going to pretend to be something that I think they're going to like. I show them who I am, and we'll see how it goes. And a lot of the time it'd go very well, and sometimes it wouldn't. But it's the right thing to do, I think. And I think the comedy industry should foster this mentality of open-mindedness that, if someone's going on stage and they've got good stuff, they're funny, and they're giving an authentic representation of themselves, then, all power to them. Let's get behind them. Let's back them. But I don't think anyone's ever going to be on the same page. No two people have exactly the same views, do they?
Well, that's quite funny about jonglers, by the way. I used to do that all the time. I used to enter rooms and think, I would never want to be in this room for any reason. It's like it's the back of some weird nightclub I would never visit. I'm slightly scared to be in here, and I've got to go on the stage and make these people laugh. I mean, that's the thing. I mean, people talk about stand-ups being brave. I never really thought it was about being brave. It's just particular talent. But those kind of times, maybe that's a little bit brave. Like this is like, I don't really. And it would be horrific. I mean, and like you say, it doesn't always go well. And a lot of time it does. And yeah, and there's a certain pride in being able to make people laugh who are, maybe not like you, or maybe you don't know anything about them. But my problem, Andrew, is that it's not just about their views. It's now about their awareness. So if one is interested in the culture war, for example, using the term broadly, and culture war issues, a lot of people don't even know about them. They increasingly know about them, but for a long time there, and still, they won't even know the premise. So you can't really make someone laugh at something if they don't know the topic, right? So you get up at Comedy Unleashed, and you know they're going to know certain topics, and those topics can be subverted and so on, and thus the humor arises. But you can't do that in a lot of rooms because you don't know what people know anymore, because we live in different worlds. We might live in a sort of online culture war world, and they live in the real world, so-called. Have you come across that?
I don't know. I think I think people are a lot more clued up than they were 10 years ago. I think people are. I think people. I think there's so much information out there. It's so much media that, I kind of don't really feel like that's a worry that people aren't going to be aware of the issue you're talking about. It might be so, unless it's something quite niche, unless it's, I think if you're talking in broad subject areas, then, I think you're fine. But, I think if you have to set things up. If you want to talk about some very specific individual or thing that's happened in the news, or I think you have to set that up. I think you have to kind of, you have to walk an audience through that and say, are you aware of this? Have you heard about that? And then you set it up, and then you can get into it. But I don't think there's many people that aren't aware of this friction that exists, this cultural friction, whatever you want to term it, the culture wars and these very significant divisions that exist, because the stuff that happens on Twitter spills over into these tabloid newspapers and spills over onto TV news. I think everyone's aware of it. But there's certainly, if you're going to go on stage late at night in a sort of nightclub on a Friday, Saturday night, it has always been the case and will always be the case that people have been drinking a lot and they're on coke, and that if you've got anything other than 20 minutes of dick jokes, then you might have a hard time. But you either want to take the money for those gigs or you don't. But they're not reflective of comedy in general. I would hope they're a very specific sort of environment that you get sucked into a little bit as a club comedian that you don't need to do. I would say to any comic starting out doing gigs, you're sort of desperate for stage time, but there's stage time you don't need. If I would say to anyone, any new comic starting out, don't go anywhere. Maybe don't go anywhere near a nightclub. Or gig in a nightclub. That's what I'd say.
Yeah. Well, I did maybe too many of those gigs. I sort of got sucked into it, being represented by the Comedy Store after just a year in comedy. I kind of got sucked into the club world and got good at bashing out those kind of fast jokes and not necessarily always talking about what I'd want to talk about. Maybe you're right. Maybe I'm out of touch because I've not been doing stand-up for a bit. Because I was thinking when I said that example about do people even get it, things like at Comedy Unleashed, I can come and do a joke about subverting the NHS, and this is at peak of NHS worship. Now it's changed a little bit, but I would say things like, I did the clapping, you know what I mean? But like what I did, I just slowly turned my back to indicate my preference for an insurance-based system or something like some stupid joke, like not a perfect joke, but it was like it wasn't the best joke ever, but it was about like I stand with Switzerland. It was this joke about subverting, about hating the NHS. Maybe it wasn't the best joke ever, but I found that in normal clubs, on this broad point, you could only ever love the NHS. Maybe you have to just be more nuanced about it. But, whereas at Comedy Unleashed, you can say you don't like the NHS, and that'll get a clap. And I just think, this divide is so great. Now, maybe you're saying it's just a question of catering it, doing the right setup. Maybe it's the case that if I was smart enough, just like any audience, one's a golf club and they're 60, one's Friday night and they're 20. Maybe it was just young people who didn't know anything, and that was the wrong kind of joke. Probably, because I still would smash the gigs with other jokes. So maybe you're right, and maybe to me there's like a set orthodoxy, particularly in London, particularly young people, and you can work within that. And then at Comedy Unleashed, there's another orthodoxy, and you can work within that. But you don't see it like that.
I think you can frame what you're doing for any audience. I think, I remember you performing that joke at Comedy Unleashed, and it did really, really well. And, but I think in front of any intelligent audience, another room you might perform, it's going to get a reaction in front of any audience that's not a late night, Friday night, Saturday night kind of crowd that's having a night out and aren't entirely compos mentis and have had a drink and are not quite in the room. I think if you're doing it at a gig where people are there for the comedy, it's always going to get a reaction. It might get a reaction, ooh, and people kind of reacting as if you've said something controversial or something they might boo. It's something you disagree with, but there's comedy there as well, isn't there? And you take it even further, say, and you sort of laugh at the kind of. There's laughs to be had in the fact that people might have. Might bring strong feelings about that sort of thing to a comedy club, or strong feelings about anything to a comedy club, because there's a lot of comedic potential in people getting angry about something a comedian said on a comedy club in the moment, because the whole contract between comedian and audience is that when you walk through the door, you're not supposed to take anything that's being said seriously. You're there to laugh. Comedians there to make jokes, and you're there to be entertained and to laugh. So if you've taken something seriously, you've broken the contract. Not only that, is you've misunderstood the nature of what you're watching. So there's a lot of comedy value there. So hang on, you come to the right place. You might have been better off in the audience of Question Time or some sort of rally or local council meeting, but this is a comedy club. These are jokes. Relax.
Yeah.
We're here to find common ground and to laugh together.
That's when people when they go, ooh, I always sort of mock them. I'm like, F off. I mean, like, as if you're better than this joke. I'm always like, ooh. I always think it's so pathetic when people do that. It's like, oh, we can't be that.
Yeah. In that scenario, the joke becomes the setup. I mean,
yeah.
So it's there's always ways like and there are comedians that thrive on that sort of thing. Bill Burr and Jim Jeffries that will they'll play in front of liberal audiences, and they've got that liberal within themselves, but they'll deliberately put something out that they will know will kind of will wind up that element of the audience, and then they puncture it and they dissect it, and it's it's a real strength. And of course all comedy relies on tension and release, so it's an incredible way of achieving big atmosphere in a room, in a comedy room, and a lot of laughter. If you can build up this tension, one way of doing that is by saying things that are potentially controversial, and you build up a lot of tension, and then you puncture it, and by undercutting what you've said or dissecting it in an absurd way, and the whole audience, the tension's released, the whole audience is doubled over with laughter. And all comedy works like that. It's that build up of tension and release, but there's got to be trust in the room. There's got to be trust between the audience and the comic that's where you're going. If an audience doesn't trust the comedian enough to listen to them set something up by saying something controversial, if they want to then step in and trample all over any comedic potential that setup might have, there's a trust problem. And I think that's a wider social problem, isn't it? And that's at the very kind of foundations of what people want to call a culture war is a trust problem, a questioning of people's motives, and a lack of faith in humanity. You know,
Yeah.
uh, you disagree with there's certain things that you disagree with. You think, oh, these people, the children being mutilated. Because they've expressed that they want to be trans. This is a horrific crime, and there's a very real argument for that. And then, but the people involved in doing that, I don't know if they're psychopaths. I don't know if they're evil people. They're not psychopaths. They're trying to help this kid, or they've got some weird worldview. They're a product of their own experiences. I don't think there's as much malice in the world as you would these culture wars as you might be given to believe. And it's very easy to misconstrue people's intentions and to paint them in a bad light. And that's especially true of comedians. You can. How many? It's so easy to do in real life that you're in an environment with people, and maybe you don't know them that well, and you make a joke, and it doesn't necessarily go the right way you want it to, because the people there don't know you well enough. And all humour is about establishing trust in a way in your relationships with people. When you can joke around with each other, that's how you know you can trust each other. If you make a joke and someone laughs and you laugh, then all right, this is a friend. And if you make a joke and someone's upset and offended about it, well, that's someone who should probably go their own way. So it's a trust thing, isn't it? I think it's a social tool for building trust so much of the time, comedy or humour and jokes. And I think the fact that comedy is having such a hard time at the moment, and there's so little of it on TV, and comedians are getting in trouble constantly, it's symptomatic of a much wider lack of trust in society. And of course that's going to exist. I mean, there's so much. There's the way the reaction to the COVID pandemic is being picked apart constantly by people now, and the distrust of anyone in a position of authority who made decisions during that time is perfectly understandable, and the whole kind of anger over the vaccine and side effects and lockdown and the anger over that and the cost to people in all sorts of ways is entirely legitimate. But at the same time, the people that made those decisions, the likelihood is they thought they were doing the right thing. They thought they were, they were doing their best, and they were making good decisions. Beyond that, you might you start thinking about whether the whole thing was orchestrated and made a big kind of the whole thing was planned, and there's malevolent globalist forces at play that put us through all this, and it's all about control and oppressing us all, and it's easy to get into that place mentally, very easy. But you've got to ask yourself: are people that malicious? Is there that much malevolence in the world? And it comes up to the individual. Depends how much faith in humanity you've got. But comedy relies on it. Comedy relies on trust and faith in humanity a little bit, I think.
Interesting, yeah. And it's on trust and things like that. That's one thing that's there when you come out now, or when I was doing comedy, the audience are more tense because they're so tense about these issues, and because people can be cancelled and all these kind of things. And I've noticed that. And obviously, if you're a straight white guy, there's perhaps an extra tension. Although I used to have a nice joke that sort of punctured the tension, literally by calling it out. I was saying, I have a friend who's a black comedian. He comes out and goes, any black people in the house, and everyone loves it. But if I come out and say any black people in the house, there's a tension. People are going, why do you want to know that? Is you going to ask them to leave? But if I come out and say any white people in the house, it's even worse. And it was a whole thing. But I like that joke because it said there's a tension, and it was actually literally just calling the tension out as the punchline, which is, anyway, that's a technical thing. One difference between you and me might be that you toured, whereas I wasn't touring. I was always playing to rowdy crowds who are not mine. So that might be a slight difference in perception. But yeah, tension and trust, that's very interesting. You've got to trust the comedian and comedy in a larger sense, and we don't. We've lost the meaning of what it is. We think we take it very literally. We've lost free speech, we've lost comedy, we've lost the cultural assumptions behind them. So yeah, all very interesting points. Because these kids are making noise outside and I need the loo, I might just sort of start to end the podcast. But I wanted to ask you this quite... key question that I often ask, though I don't know if you'll even agree with the framing. You've mentioned the culture war. I sometimes ask how we win the culture war. Now, Jeff Norcott said we shouldn't even frame it as a war, and obviously we assumes that you're on my side and things like this. But what do you think to that? And if you even accept the question, how is this thing won or ended, or does it just carry on forever?
Yeah, I don't think anyone is a question of winning, is it? It's about people being allowed to... it's about people encroaching on each other's freedom as little as possible, and finding a way to do that. Because on both sides of, culture war, if you want to call it that, it's people feeling like they're being oppressed and their freedoms are being attacked, and their way of life is being threatened. But there's, I think so much, more than anything, we've lost. I think socially, we've lost this idea of compromise and negotiation. This idea that we all have to make compromises about who we want to be in order for society to work properly. And we can't have, none of us may not have the world that we want or everything that we want in life, but we have to make necessary compromises and sacrifices to ensure, that society as a whole works and we all get on with each other and we can trust each other. And I think the problem is that, certainly amongst the younger generation, is that this idea that they can be whatever they want to be, they can do whatever they want to do, which I think has been culturally instilled in them. Well, you can't. You have to be what you can be within the context in which we all have to live. But there's this kind of this individualism that exists. This idea that this kind of self-absorption, that rather than this sort of a community-spirited frame of mind is a big problem, I think, and a lack of willingness to compromise on everyone's behalf, on both sides of if you want to call it cultural, you call it cultural, but I think it's there has to be a realistic middle ground, a meeting point, a meeting of minds, and a kind of concessions and compromise. And I think we move towards that anyway as the economy, as economically we all start to suffer. That's the great leveler. If you can't pay your bills, if you can't support your family, you haven't got food to eat, then you're going to have to make compromises. Because at the end of the day, it doesn't matter where you stand on the political spectrum if you can't put food on the table. So I think it happens naturally as things get worse economically. I think the kind of this sort of hysterical individualism starts to subside a little bit. The whole thing with gender pronouns, which maybe a kind of year or two ago was people were very sort of passionate about, and suddenly they appear at the bottom of everyone's emails, and a big deal in the workplace. I feel like there's a far more relaxed attitude to that now, and I think people are a little bit, even people who might be quite keen on that stuff and identifying in that way are quite sort of, it's something that people are a little bit more willing to make a concession about how they're addressed. But you know, it doesn't apply to everyone. Obviously, there's a story in the newspaper yesterday about the transgender worker at Starbucks who felt that they'd been misgendered, and they sort of attacked a customer because they felt they'd been misgendered and called the customer transphobic, and then now they've been sacked by Starbucks because of that, which I think is, I don't know what to make of that, but I think that's a rare instance. I don't know how much of that is still going on these days, but I think that's an example of how things are softening a little bit and how people are prepared to make certain concessions. And I think that, as we spoke about earlier, the whole mass uncontrolled immigration situation used to be a taboo, but now it's kind of it's more of an open conversation. And so I think as things become more extreme economically, people's lives get more difficult, then they become more willing to compromise and make concessions. And when everything's going well, people get lost in their own individuality. So I don't think there's any winners. I don't think there's any winners. I think everyone needs to will have to make concessions, but it's better to live without this kind of constant animosity and constant kind of malignant kind of attitude towards each other.
Yeah, that was all very interesting, but do you think it is changing a little bit then? You said economically it's going to change, and Starmer said the other day people don't care about wokeness or the culture war, he said, because really they care about economics and all these other things. I don't think they're separate personally, and I think a lot of the things he claims are separate, like the NHS. The NHS isn't separate from the culture war because you've got transgender surgery and all these things. But maybe you're right that economics will finally end some of that selfish culture, though we thought the so-called pandemic, or maybe I shouldn't say that on YouTube, we thought the pandemic was gonna end that, but it didn't. It just made it worse. But it'd be interesting to see. But one thing I did notice was shifting a little bit. That Bridgerton woman said that the balcony was terribly white at the coronation. And actually there was more pushback on that than we would have been used to. So I wonder if this is something that people are getting a little bit sick of. And you alluded to it brilliantly in your recent set. And I've been in trouble for saying that, for not getting booked on a gig because I was a straight white man, and having a few comments about that was what got me piled on. But you said a funny thing. I mean, if you don't mind me quoting your stand-up, it was just very funny. You said, "I apologize for my white male privilege. I understand that as a pasty, anemic, creepy-faced, squeaky-voiced, 5'8", scrawny, ginger beta male, I have never, will never, could never know what it's like to be discriminated against." That was one of my favorite bits. It got a massive response. And it taps into so many things, that class being an issue, as you mentioned earlier, not just race and so on, which they constantly try and avoid. In the comedy world, they occasionally try and do something about it, but it never really takes off because they've kind of abandoned that as an issue. But you were talking about this thing about the alleged white privilege. Do you think that's one issue where people are just a bit sick of the narrative and it's changing slightly?
Well, I think there's an increasing awareness that discrimination isn't specific to certain groups. We're all discriminated against. We've all got something about us where we're discriminated against. If you're short, you're tall, you're fat, thin, you're old, you're too young. You're poor, got no money, you're rich. There's something. Everyone's got something that makes their life difficult, and you can't claim special status because you feel like you're discriminated against. And you certainly can't use a historical perspective saying because this stuff happened to my ancestors hundreds of years ago, that's impacted on me. No, you can't use the crimes of the past to play the victim in the present, because we're all struggling. Everyone's discriminated against one way or another, and you can either play the victim and use that to your advantage, or you can stand on your own merits. Now, unfortunately, there's legislation that exists which favours certain groups in society. The Equalities Act 2010 gives certain groups in society certain rights and privileges that other discriminated against groups don't have. And we're all discriminated against one way or another. It doesn't come down to groups. It's a fact of life. I think there's a growing awareness of that, and increasingly people have less patience with victim playing, and people can see through it and see the dishonesty of it sometimes. I don't know. That's what I get a sense of. But you're right. I mean, you quoted that joke. The fact that I can make jokes like that, and I can make joke. I've made that joke at normal, just regular comedy clubs, and it goes down really well. And I make it a Comedy Unleashed, it goes down really well. So, that might have something to do with, as I was talking about earlier, authenticity, and that, I can say it without flinching or without feeling like I'm going to get myself into trouble, because in my mind it's rational, reasonable and true, and demonstrable, so I can say it with humour and conviction and confidence, and I think that carries to any audience, really. And someone could say the opposite if they, if they believed it. They could say actually the group that I'm part of, our suffering is worse than anybody else's suffering that's ever existed, and they could make a joke of that somehow, and if they had the conviction behind it, it would carry. Which and there are comedians out there that do that. But I think there's less patience for the idea that certain groups deserve special protection and a special status, because we're all having a hard time, one way or another.
Yeah. And just two more questions then, since we've done so long. But I just want to have two more questions, because I always ask, is the country finished? And I just wanted to get your take on that. Britain, England, whatever.
It's transforming into something it's never been. It's finished. The country as it was 20 years ago, 30 years ago, when I was young, it's a different country to that now. It's transforming, but there again, that's what's always happened to a degree. But it's going to be, again, a very different country in 10, 20 years than it is now, and it feels like there's nothing that's going to stop that. And I don't necessarily think it's a bad thing. I don't think there's any reason to cling to the past. I think as long as we're building a culture and a society that places fair play and merit and honesty at its centre. For me, then we're going in the right direction. But unfortunately, that's not the case at the moment. I think this country is made up of people from a lot of disparate cultures, but within those cultures, and within, the religions that people come from, there's a lot of common ground. I think it's incredibly important that people grow up with a strong moral framework, and I think there are a lot of young people growing up without that, and who have been growing up without that for a few decades now, and I think that's a worry. I think you have to have a moral compass in life and a moral framework, and a sense of what's right and wrong, to function in society. So that's a worry, and where we find, where people find their moral compass from, and a set of moral values is a big question, I think. And you would hope that comes down to people from their parents, because it's not coming from religion anymore. I mean, to a large extent, it seems to come from schools and a certain politics that exists in schools and academic institutions. That seems to shape the moral compass of a lot of people, say between the age of 20 and maybe 20 and 30 these days. But I don't know. It's changing. It's changing into something else. It's transforming the country, and there's no. I don't think there's nothing to stop that, and there's nothing to be. There's nothing to be particularly outraged about that with it either. I mean, things change. We're all in a constant state of flux, so there's no reason to expect otherwise.
All right. Well, one more question then, because people have asked me this. They've said, get Andrew on GB News. So my last question is, why won't you do GB News?
Yeah, I think it's about the hours, really. The hours thing. You guys always seem to be on late at night, and I think you probably start early evening, and I just don't want to miss out on putting my daughter to bed and reading her a bedtime story. I think that's what it comes down to.
But you've done stand-up for years. You can't do late nights. That's crazy.
Yeah, not anymore. Although I'd be more, if I'm honest, I'd be more inclined to do it for stand-up than I would to work at GB News, because I don't really like the idea that I'm working for other people, that I'm working for an organisation, and working on their terms, which is the whole foundation of why I've got into trouble doing comedy, is that I won't do comedy on the industry's terms. I know what's funny. I've been doing this a long time. I know the best possible thing that I can do on stage to make people laugh, and if that doesn't conform to this silly new set of rules that the comedy industry wants me to abide by, then I'll go elsewhere. And it's the same with GB News. There's all sorts of rules in place there in terms of what you can say and what you can't say, what you can do and what you can't do, and it's not really for me, I think.
Fair enough.
Having said that, if I need the money,
we'll suddenly see you. It'll be too late then, Andrew. We'll be like, no, you didn't want us then. You can't come now.
It might be too late already. You're doing so well. The channel's doing so well, and you guys are smashing it. You and Leo and Josh, and I suppose I better begrudgingly say Lewis as well. He doesn't deserve it. But you're doing so well, there won't be, it's difficult for anyone else to get in there soon.
Well, I'm worried it's going to be difficult for me to get in there with all the former Tory politicians now. It's just like about 10 Tory politicians taking our jobs. But yeah, thanks, man. I don't know. You're right, though. It is a job. I mean, it is weird working with comedians and in an office space. I mean, imagine that. It's like a nightmare reality show or something. And you're right, you do have sort of bosses and stuff. It doesn't suit me either. I need sort of total control, which is why I'm doing podcasts now. Yeah. And the more creative control I have, the better things tend to go. It's just something I've noticed. So, like you with your stand-up.
I think you're right. I think it's creatively, the more control over you have of what you're doing, the better you'll be, and the better the stuff you come up with, because it's, as again what I come back to, it's authenticity. And then if you've got 10 people telling you what to do, you're not being what you can be and what you should be. You're presenting something that's insincere.
Well, I always try and be totally honest on GB, just for the record, and no one tells me you can't say this, but of course we're working within Ofcom regulations, so there's bound to be. So I try and present things and say, oh, that was satire, and I work around it. But you're right, it's never going to be 100% free.
Yeah, but as things go, it's the freest you'll be in UK television at the moment. It's the freest. Yeah. It's the freest you'll be. That's for sure. There's no other place where you can where you get the degree of leeway that you'll get at GB News, and that's why there's so many comedians are showing up, and the people, unlikely people as well. A few people I see. I don't have a TV license, so I don't watch TV, but I see clips and I see comedians pop up on clips on social media. So, and it surprises me people to turn up on GB News that, I would have thought from the way they behave on social media, they might be dead against it. But money talks.
Yeah. Well, you're right. Some of them seem to be on the other side, but they need the work. Other people are just more like me, who are just sort of suits us because that's we're just who we are and being authentic.
Absolutely, it's the right place for comedians who haven't necessarily been treated very well. Like you, Josh Howie has not been treated well. You haven't really been treated well at all by the comedy industry, and someone like Scott Capurro, who's an incredibly wonderful comedian who doesn't get the opportunity or the recognition he should. It's a place for you guys, and a place for someone like me if I had the self-discipline. So it's a real positive in the world of broadcasting, I think, and I think testament to that is the amount of hate it attracts on social media and the outrage and from a certain sort of person. I think you're doing something right if you're conjuring up that level of feeling.
Yeah, I've got used to being called bell end, massive bell end, dog whistling bell end, far right moron. It's daily.
You're doing quite well. That's far more complimentary than most of the stuff I get. You're doing all right if they can't find any worse than that to say.
Oh yeah, thanks, man. So where can people find you? You managed to get your own name on Twitter, which is good, Andrew Lawrence. So there's that, and you're smashing it on YouTube. You got almost 100,000 last I checked.
Yeah, I'm mostly on YouTube. People can come and follow me on YouTube, Andrew Lawrence Comedy, and I'm doing some gigs here and there. I've got a tour date in Southampton, a few tour days. So I'm trying to get another one in London. I sold out my first one in London, and the Southampton one in October is not till October, but that's just been added because I sold one out. But I'm trying to add things here and there, but not doing that much stand up. So it's mostly you'll mostly find me on YouTube, and if you're on YouTube, I always advertise what else I'm doing there. So if you're interested, then come and follow me there. I'd appreciate it.
All right, awesome. And hopefully everyone will give the podcast 5 stars and share it with their friends. I'm on YouTube as well, far less successfully than you, Nick Dixon Comedy. I'm just starting to build the channel, but you're smashing it on there. And thanks for doing the show, mate.
It's a pleasure. Thanks for having me on. Appreciate it. Yeah.